in on the east coast of the US. Indonesia is going to be joining us as well as yourselves. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. If you've been following the sessions all morning as I have, then you will know that you are in for a treat. I myself have learned so much today about e-commerce and the e-economy in just a few hours. So there is a lot to learn. There's also a lot to get through. So I just better go ahead. Now, I just want to advise you that this session will be broadcast live online. As you might already know, it will also be interpreted in all the UN languages with interpretation provided online via Zoom. Now, if time allows, at the end of the session, which is about an hour and a half long, we will be taking some questions as long as time allows us to. Now, you might, of course, I'm sure you know this already, that the topic that we'll be discussing during this session is towards digital and data governance for all. So towards digital and data governance for all. Now, during the next hour and a half, as I said, we hope to hear the perspectives from governments and business leaders, heads of United Nations organizations on how to ensure that the surge of digital data brings benefits for the planet. I'm sure you're all aware of how much this sector has grown in the past 2 years due to the pandemic, in spite of the pandemic. And some of people will say, well, because of the pandemic. So we'll be hearing more about that. And with the help of our diverse panelists, we will touch on economic, social, and environmental aspects of data governance and have discussions on how to find innovative governance approaches to support inclusive and sustainable development in the digital market. I'm just going to introduce our panelists to you now. Joining us from New York, like I said, it's going to be like almost a worldwide audience. It will be the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan. She is the first woman to hold the position in the history of the organization, having been elected to the post in September 2021. She'll be joining us virtually from New York. Also joining us virtually is His Excellency, Mr. Johnny Plate. He's the Serving Minister of Communications and Informatics of the Republic of Indonesia, and he was appointed to that post in 2019. Also joining us, Ms. Amani Abu Zaid. She was elected Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy of the African Union Commission in March 2017. She's been serving as an international development expert in Africa and in various leading positions over the past 30 years. Joining us is Mr. Vint Cerf. He is generally known as, one of the inventors of the internet, which is actually a big title to drop on someone, but it is the fact. He's also worked for Google as Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist since 2005. The only of our panelists who's joining me here now, thank you very much for not leaving me alone here, Andy, is Mr. Andy Yen. He's the founder and CEO of Proton Mail. It's a very young company founded in 2013 that provides global secure email service with a passion to building core internet services that respect privacy, protect freedom, and help make the world a better place. So a lot for you to chew on today after Andy speaks to us. We've also got Mr. Jerry McGovern, who recently published a book titled Worldwide Waste. A very interesting title, which explains the environmental impact of digital transformation. Mr. McGovern has also given speeches about designing under digital experiences in more than 40 countries. And last, but in no way the least, is Miss Xiaofei Zhao, founder and chief executive officer of Rogrand, former e-trade for women advocate. It's the largest pharmaceutical biotech e-commerce platform in China. So these are the panelists that you will be hearing from today. Without further ado, I just want to introduce a video message from the President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid. He's sent us a message, so if we can just play that now.
Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD, Excellencies, I'm honored to address this year's UNCTAD e-commerce week. Digital technology, and by extension, the digital economy, has a profound impact on development, touching on everything from innovation and the creation of jobs to life-saving vaccines and medicines to emission reduction technologies. The UNCTAD e-commerce week thus offers an important opportunity to reflect on progress, developments, and challenges for the full spectrum of stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, while digitalization now plays a vital role in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the siloed and fragmented hallmarks of digitalization has generated new risks and challenges, particularly around inequality. Nowhere was this more evident than during the COVID-19 pandemic. Remote education, remote work, and remote access to goods and services were, relatively speaking, the luxuries of a few. For the 2.6 billion that remain offline, of which 96% live in developing countries, the digital divide was very stark indeed. At the same time, the digital divide is only the tip of the iceberg. Online abuse and misuse are rampant, as is disinformation. And these challenges will only multiply as more and more connect online. The current context sees digital data amassed through a fractured digital system, one that can at times threaten human rights and values, and that jeopardizes the principles of economic development. This does not have to be the case. Digital inequalities, the data divide, and the infringement of human values online are not inevitable outcomes. They can and should be changed. This is why moving towards digital and data governance must be done with urgency. This means developing digital governance systems that promote economic and social development and that underscores the protection of human rights. It also means enhanced cooperation. Indeed, no single corporation or business should ever have the means to monopolize the governance and regulation of a public good. Ladies and gentlemen, cross-border data flows are vital to international trade as well as e-commerce and internet-enabled services. It allows people increased access to a wide and global range and quality of services, and it enables businesses to cut costs and reduce prices for customers. However, recent years have seen a steady rise in the number of data localization measures in force around the world. While it is understandable that restrictions on data flows are usually driven by privacy and national security concerns, flexible regimes for cross-border data flows delivers social and economic benefits to individuals, businesses, and governments by allowing the digital economy to flourish. Furthermore, cross-border flows of data are currently regulated by a number of international, regional, and national laws and instruments. Enhanced cooperation between countries and regions could help achieve much-needed convergence in these varied approaches. In this regard, the United Nations offers the most universal platform for member states to engage. It also offers the most viable space to bring together all relevant stakeholders. It is therefore well placed to support global dialogues, including around data governance. The United Nations is also best placed to bring together all relevant stakeholders in ensuring that no one gets left behind, whether it is developing countries or women and girls who continue to be left disproportionately behind when it comes to online access. Technical assistance and capacity building for developing economies to pursue high standard data policies and practices and harness the benefits of digital transformation must be a priority. This is yet another area where the United Nations can and should mobilize support. Excellencies, I commend UNCTAD's work to reframe and broaden the debate on digital economy and data governance, and I welcome today's wide participation of stakeholders. The collaboration between business leaders, digital experts, civil society groups, and the United Nations can help ensure digital and data-driven benefits can be realized by all. Through these efforts, we can collectively chart a new path for digital and data governance, a path that closes the digital and data-driven inequality gap through economic and social developments, and a path that connects expertise and draws upon the viewpoints of the vulnerable and populations further behind. By doing so, we can ensure everyone's voice is heard and included. We can foster a safer and equal digital world for all. I look forward to the outcome of today's dialogue and offer my best wishes for a very successful e-commerce week. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Abdullah Shahid, President of the United Nations General Assembly. Next up, we'll hear from the Secretary General of UNCTAD. She'll be offering her welcoming remarks, Ms. Rebecca Greenspan.
Rebecca, you are muted. You need to unmute your microphone.
Now, do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I was saying thank you to Peter and thank you to the President of the General Assembly. Peter, it's good to have you with us again. And thank you to the wonderful panelists that we have today, Johnny, Amani, Vint, Andy, Jerry, Xiaofei. Thank you so much for being with us. And I also greet all the excellencies, the friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen that are with here in this session. It really gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this high-level dialogue of the 2020 edition of the e-commerce week. I am joining you today from New York, but rest assured that I will be hoping on a flight tonight to be present in Geneva during the rest of the week. I wish this e-commerce week would have come at a better time for the world, but it hasn't. As we highlighted in our report to the Global Crisis Response Group set up by Secretary General Guterres in response to the war in Ukraine, the developing world is at the brink of a perfect storm of debt, food, and energy crisis. Given elevated levels of socioeconomic stress following the COVID-19 crisis and the unremitting cost of climate change, global exposure to this crisis is counted in the billions of people living in over 100 countries. As a result, a systemic debt crisis is unfolding as we speak. Inflation is at multi-decades high, and instances of civil unrest are brewing in all corners of the world. In the midst of all this, our progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals has been severely hampered in the past few years, and we have witnessed with alarm growing poverty levels and greater inequalities. When the 2030 Agenda was approved, we at UNCTAD calculated the investment gap for developing countries to meet their SDGs at $2.5 trillion. The pandemic widened the gap to $4.3 trillion. And the war in Ukraine is expected to widen this gap further. Now, an ever widening gap is not a gap, it is an abyss. But there are some trends that can give us hope. These developments are taking place at a time of rapid digital transformation of our economies and societies, with important implications to our future. With the rollout of 5G mobile technology, greater reliance on artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things, we are set for a further rapid expansion of digital data and digital disruption. The overall theme today of our high-level dialogue is toward digital and data governance for all. There are very good reasons for focusing on the governance aspect, especially in view of current global challenges. Technology is not deterministic. The disruptions that come with the use of new technologies, including digital technologies, create both opportunities and risks, and they affect different people, enterprise, and societies in different ways. Take COVID as an example. Our need to lock down to combat the spread of the virus led to a very fast expansion in the use of digital solutions to enable teleconferencing, e-commerce, distance learning, telework, e-medicine. The ability to share scientific data also helped to produce new vaccines in record time. And new mobile apps were quickly developed to help with efforts to control and trace the spread of the virus. At the same time, far from all people, businesses and governments were able to take full advantage of digital solutions. But the pandemic served as a key reminder of the wide gaps that still prevail in terms of digital connectivity and digital readiness. As a result, the acceleration of digital transformation, like the President of the General Assembly was saying, has accentuated the risk of widening digital as well as development inequalities across and within countries. Digitalization is also relevant in the context of climate change. The collection and analysis of big sets of meteorological data are crucial elements of the scientific work that can serve as a basis for policy decisions. Similarly, digital solutions can be used, for example, to limit the need for traveling by enabling telework or teleconferences like we are doing today. Digital solutions energy grids. On the other hand, we have to admit that we have learned that the surge in digital data resulting from the wide-ranging digital transformations witnessed today is in itself adding to the emission of CO2. As we watch more videos online, play more digital games, and use ever more sophisticated smart devices, we are generating more data and therefore also use more energy. And this at a time when energy is becoming an increasingly rare and expensive resource. So governance is of an essence, is what will determine the outcome of digital transformations and the rules of the game for digitalization. Many questions should be addressed then, like who will benefit and lose from digital disruptions? How can the value creation in the digital economy be more equally shared? Who should be responsible for externalities deriving from the use of digital solutions? How can we ensure that markets are competitive and contestable in an area characterized by huge network effects and winner-takes-all features. And again, how do we ensure that data can be harnessed to deal with climate change, pandemics, urban planning, and productivity, while at the same time protecting the privacy of users, protecting national security, and avoiding that most of the benefits from data are captured by a few rather than by many? Because so far, that is exactly what is happening. According to last year's Digital Economy Report, the market is very highly concentrated. Only 7 companies represent more than 90% of the market capitalization of the world's digital platforms. So, dear friends, these are highly complex questions to address, not least in view of the rapid pace at which digitalization is unfolding against the backdrop of wide digital and data divides. It is more important than ever that we bring great minds like yours from all stakeholders together and look for policy responses that can chart the way towards inclusive and sustainable development from digitalization. I hope that this e-commerce week will help in this context. The topic of data governance is currently being discussed in various fora and from various perspectives. I believe the UN system must play a prominent role, like the President of the General Assembly just said. But even the UN system will need to consider novel ways to accelerate progress in this space. There are already various initiatives at the United Nations that are relevant to various aspects of data governance. But for the UN to be fully leveraged in this area, it may be necessary to create a dedicated international coordinating mechanism that will focus on global data governance and development, that can attract the right skills and ensure effective links to other ongoing processes and initiatives led by civil society, academia, and the private sector. These proposals, as others on the table, merit a serious discussion. We know it is not going to be easy, but inaction is the worst of all options. Let's collectively think at better ways to shape our collective future. I welcome all of you again to join the conversations during this week and beyond. I really look forward to working with all of you and hearing the many important things you have to say and share with us. And I really thank you for being here today. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Ms. Greenspan. Very thought-provoking message there from you. I think we should just hand over the microphones from various parts of the world now to our different panelists. I'm just going to start by asking a question of His Excellency John Plate, the Serving Minister of Communications and Informatics of the Republic of Indonesia. Now, as we've heard in the various speeches that we've heard so far, for the past 2 years, the digital economic activities have become one of the pillars that supported the recovery of many parts of the world from COVID-19. Now, Indonesia is one of the world's leading economies and is now serving as the G20 presidency. Mr. Plate, what do you regard as the main challenges to your country in your bid to fully harness a rapidly evolving data-driven digital economy? And what can we expect from this year's G20's discussions on cross-country data flow?
The Honorable Secretary General of UNCTAD, Madam Rebecca Greenspan, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to UNCTAD for the initiative to organize this high-level dialogue on data and digitalization for development, gathering multi-stakeholders' views to share and discuss ideas on data and digitalization for socio-economic development. For this juncture, I was given 2 questions by the committee. The first one is regarding the G20 Digital Economic Working Group priority issues, especially on the discussion of the Digital Economic Working Group's priority issue number 3, data free flow with trust and cross-border data flow. The second one is on Indonesia's effort to fully harness the rapidly evolving data-driven digital economy, as well as how does Indonesia assess and deal with the risk of highly fragmented internet due to a lack of consensus at the global level. As this year's G20 presidency and through the first chairmanship of the G20 Digital Economic Working Group, Indonesia is promoting the theme of achieving a resilient recovery, working together for a more inclusive, empowering, and sustainable digital transformation to raise global awareness and on the importance of the physical network connectivity and social interconnectivity, as well as digital security. This theme also includes 3 priority issues, namely 1. Connectivity and post-COVID-19 recovery. 2. Digital skills and digital literacy, as well as 3. Data free flow with trust and cross-border data flow. The first priority issue, we propose to the G20 members to acknowledge the importance of improving digital connectivity and recognize the necessity to work together to manifest a network of digital people connectivity, which may further help digital entrepreneurs and business players to remain innovative, resilient, as well as prosper in this age of economic expansion. This emphasis on people-centered digital connectivity is of the utmost importance. The second priority issue, Indonesia G20 presidency proposes the formulation of the G20 toolkit for measuring digital skills and digital literacy. Indonesia envisions the toolkit to provide a framework to measure various levels of digital literacy and skills, including ICT-related skills. The toolkit may lay out 3 components to aid G20 members in conducting measurements on different levels of digital literacy and skills, such as basic digital skills, intermediate digital skills, and advanced digital skills. And the third priority issue, Indonesia underlines the significance of better data governance on the international level. There is an urgent need to collaborate on cross-border data governance, and Indonesia promotes 4 main principles of the global management of cross-border data flows, which are lawfulness, fairness, transparency, and reciprocity. We currently stock taking the vast and various positions among members. During the scheduled meetings, we propose the members to discuss and explore commonalities regarding this issue. We hope by discussing these various views, members can further the discussion and can identify new areas that the countries may agree upon. We hope that these discussions on cross-border data may lead to positive impacts, such as rapid international trade and the growth of local economies. For the second question, Indonesia notes with deep concern that the advancement and implementation of digital transformation are still experiencing some challenges. While digital transformation is accelerating the growth of many sectors, on the contrary, the issue of digital divide persists. This can take shape in the form of unequal access to connectivity, the lack of global consensus on data regulation, as well as the shortfall of the required digital skill and digital literacy to utilize digital technology responsibly and productively. These are only a few of the many challenges that the digital paradox presents. As the G20 presidency, Indonesia seeks to take the vast and various positions among members. Given the dynamic of the first Digital Economy Working Group meeting, Indonesia expects further constructive discussion to cater to the need and different views of the G20 member states in the directions of a more facilitative manner on cross-border data flows and to seek a fine commonality among the member states. Indonesia will look to continually address this issue both in the short term and the long term. Recent indicators imply that Indonesia still have room for growth. Data in the year 2021 showed that Indonesia ranked 66 in the overall inclusive internet index and placed Indonesia into moderate digital literacy category with a score of 3.49 out of 5. Cognition of these figures, we seek to further the development in these areas through various programs and initiatives in the effort to bridge the digital divide. To enrich the discussion of the G20 Digital Economic Working Group priority issues, Indonesia invites global knowledge partners, including UNCTAD, to develop a comprehensive framework that facilitates a multi-stakeholders dialogue, including on global data governance. This collaborative dialogue is deemed necessary to gather stakeholders' views on the applicability of the data flow principle and support a more trusted cross-border data flow by further highlighting various aspects of this issue. Indonesia is committed to constructively contributing to the discussion on data free flow with trust and cross-border data flow as a catalyst for future discussion in the meeting of the G20 Digital Economic Working Group and Digital Economy Minister meeting, as well as other international organizations, meetings, and fora. I wish you a fruitful and enriching discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnny Plate, the Minister for Communications and Informatics. I'd like to bring in now the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy for the African Union, Ms. Amani Abu Zaid. Ms. Abu Zaid, I understand that recently the African Union adopted a new African data policy framework. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Sure. Good afternoon, Peter. Allow me at the outset to read Her Excellency Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, all excellencies attending this panelist, the distinguished partners, and other guests, and to express how much I appreciate having the African Union participate in this very important discussion. And also, going back to what Rebecca said about these are challenging, unusual times. It's been the case for the last 3 years, which means that particularly for us in Africa, we need to adopt or to think of unconventional ways and solutions to our development challenges. And definitely digitalization offer fantastic opportunities for Africa to leapfrog, as the term is often used, and to help in that regard. Actually, it is foreseen that by the year 2050, digital economy will be a major part of the African economy, about $712 billion. And in the next few years, it could reach $180 billion. Also, our African Free Trade Area, the initiative that was launched 2 years ago, the market of 1.3 billion people rely increasingly on digitalization, on availability of data, digitally enabled cross-border trade in goods and services. So for all kinds of purposes, digitalization is a cornerstone of our approach to social and economic development in Africa and economic growth. So yes, the African Union has been, working on this data policy framework for Africa, and was adopted earlier this year by at the summit of heads of states and governments, again showing the commitment of our governments to that. But I must insist on the fact that this framework is just one of the many pieces and parts that we are working on within that, digital transformation agenda, whether it's, the connectivity infrastructure, the skills, the different policies, the cybersecurity, and many other aspects when it comes to digitalization. And the purpose of the framework for data policy is to set out common principles across the continent, strategic priorities, and also to identify key policy interventions to guide our African countries in forging strong national data policies, capabilities, and also to develop integrated systems to effectively use and derive value from both personal and non-personal data. So the framework, the data framework for Africa, aims to maximize cross-border data flows, promote innovation, strengthen and harmonize data governance in Africa, and thereby create a shared data ecosystem and standards, and regulate data transfers across the continent, while at the same time, of course, acknowledging disparities among our countries and emphasizing the need to safeguard national interests and people's rights. So we encourage our African states to, in matters of data system principles, accountability, and transparency, interoperability, so on. And the framework also helps or promotes the creation of co-jurisdictional frameworks at the regional continental level in Africa to cooperatively enable data to flow within the continent. We prioritize open data standards, promote transversal data policy and agile regulations. And of course, one important part is develop and strengthen capabilities in in our countries, and to build, the institutional capacity in the different African countries, while at the same time strengthening links with other regions and coordinating an African view and common position when it comes to data-related issues in international fora. So this is in a nutshell what the African Union or Africa's data framework is all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abu Zaid. I just want us to move on now quickly and invite business leaders into our discussions. I want to start with one of the pioneers of the internet. He's also known as one of the fathers of the internet, Mr. Vint Cerf. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Cerf. Now, what do you see as the biggest value of digital data and cross-border data flows?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I've already learned a lot from my colleagues, and I expect to learn more. With regard to cross-border and trans-border data flows, the value is dramatic, and I'm so glad to hear that my colleagues see this. Content distribution networks, which reduce latency and provide access to content rapidly, are one example of the need for cross-border data flow, because you have to store the data in places that are local to the users. Cloud systems don't work very well without considerable cross-border data flow. In our case at Google, the cloud data centers are scattered around the world, and we replicate information across multiple data centers to make sure that nothing gets lost. So it's very important that we move data back and forth across international boundaries in order to keep the data replicated and therefore protected and readily accessible. We couldn't index the World Wide Web unless we had the ability to cross the borders, gather the data and do the indexing and help people discover the information that's in this global resource. But we couldn't do e-commerce if it weren't possible to cross border, to move data back and forth across the borders. We could do it domestically, but we wouldn't be able to do it globally without the freedom to move the information that's needed. You couldn't collaborate on science very well if you couldn't move the data back and forth, have these kinds of discussions, share joint documents, get access to data that's been captured, for example, from the Large Hadron Collider, just to pick a particularly rich source of data. So there are so many positive things that are associated with the ability to move data back and forth, that to lose that for whatever reason, to some form of fragmentation, would diminish in a very dramatic way the utility of this thing that we call the internet and the World Wide Web.
And since I've got here, Mr. Cerf, I mean, do you see any risks in the growing role of data, though? I mean, we do know that some people say there might be risks involved when it comes to major digital platforms.
Well, of course, this is what keeps me awake at night, along with many of my colleagues, and those some on the panel here and many other at work in my company. First of all, the obvious thing is that malware can cross the data borders. Denial of service attacks can do that. The network could become fragmented because of political concerns about data flowing in and out of a country. Abusive behaviors, which we have discovered are possible and even accelerated in this online environment, are clearly risks that we have to cope with. I would also say that if we become extremely dependent on this architecture, when it doesn't work, there are all kinds of cascade failures and consequences. I invite you to consider how dependent many of us have become on our mobiles. If they don't work, all kinds of things don't work. We can't get a car to come from Uber. We can't get logged in because of two-factor authentication. We can't read our email. We can't respond to a business deal. And in some sense, there is a risk of heavy dependency on all of this architecture, and therefore an importance for making it resilient. So I would suggest, for example, when people worry about the control of access to information, which they quite reasonably should be concerned about, The mechanism for protecting it is not to isolate it in some geographic location and build barriers along geopolitical lines, but rather to encrypt the data and then provide access to it only to those who should be authorized to have access to it. Of course, that means doing good work on key management and strong authentication, so we know that only authorized parties are having access to it. But that will allow us to distribute data everywhere in this global internet and still protect access to it. So there are risks, but there are solutions to the problem, and they require collaborative implementation.
Thank you very much. So let me turn to you now, Andy. You started Proton Mail almost 10 years ago with a view to protecting civil liberties online. What's your vision of the future of digitalized society?
That's a very good. As we look at the internet and how it has been evolving over the past 10 years, clearly it has brought many benefits to the world. There's many things that we can do today that were simply not possible a decade ago. But we also, shouldn't lose sight of what was the reason for creating the World Wide Web in the first place. What was the original vision, right? And the original vision was actually to bring freedom, democracy, and equality, and free access of information to the world. And in order to do that, I think we can't lose sight of the many important factors that matter. Today, if we don't have, for example, privacy rights will undermine freedom of speech. And if you lose freedom of speech, you lose democracy. So, today, if we look at how the internet is used and leveraged or even misused around the world, there's many instances where actually, the web, instead of being a symbol of freedom, is actually a tool of oppression. So this is why I think when we look into the 21st century and how we want to develop the internet, we have to think about, yes, commerce is very important. Yes, access to information is important. Yes, we want to have data flows, across borders, but we also need to look at the regulatory aspect of that. We also need to consider how do we ensure the internet in the future works for all people and not just a small number of people or a small number of companies, and how do we really ensure that, the internet 100 years from now is really an ecosystem that allows even developing countries to also benefit from a lot of the economic opportunities that the internet provides.
Okay, we heard Mr. Cerf there talk about both the risks and, of course, the outweighing advantages of this digital society that is being built. If you were given a crystal ball, or if you were said to, if you could determine what it would be, what would be your wish for a digital and for digital and data governance?
Well, there's a long list, right? But if we start from a couple. There's a long list if I were to give you my full wish list, right? But if we focus on a couple areas, maybe we focus just on privacy first, right? I think one of the things that's very, very important is to have some level of, maybe global unification of privacy regulations. To give one example, there's already instances today where if I were to comply with the privacy laws of one country, it would make it impossible to comply with the laws somewhere else, right? That obviously, makes it very difficult to do business across borders. It also makes it very difficult to ensure that privacy rights, are able to be preserved across borders. I think also, if I come from the policy standpoint and the government standpoint, a big piece of that is also what I call, consistency in our legal approach, right? If you take Europe, for example, there's a big push a couple of years ago for GDPR, and GDPR was, I think, in many ways a revolutionary legislation. But at the same time as the European Union is pushing GDPR, it is also considering things like undermine encryption, having encryption backdoors, and these are things that are contradictory, right? So when we look at it from a policy standpoint, oftentimes regulators look at privacy and security as opposing visions. There's if you have privacy, you're going to undermine national security. And I think that's a bit of the wrong way to look at the problem. We need to consider the problem where we really view privacy and security not as in opposition to each other, but really as two sides of the same coin, right? in many ways, systems are more private, also tend to be more secure. So if you want to defend your national security, in fact, enforcing privacy legislation and enforcing strong privacy laws on tech companies is a good way to ensure the data of your citizens is better protected. So this is, I think, another one of my wish lists is if we can work out some of the contradictions today that plague the regulation in this area.
Thank you very much, Andy. And we will hear from our panelists, most of our panelists later on. But I just want to move on now to the issue of how digitalization of the society affects, the environment. And we heard the UNCTAD Secretary General, Ms. Greenspan, allude to that in her opening remarks. I want to turn now to Mr. Jerry McGovern, who's recently written a book with, what must be a fantastic title, Worldwide Waste. It explains the environmental impact of digital transformation. I mean, I'll just put that back to you, Mr. McGovern. What's the impact on the environment of this digital transformation that we're also keen about?
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be here today. We've created more data in the last 2 years than in all of previous history. And in 2020, we took more photos than the entire 20th century. In 2020, we took 1.4 trillion photos, and we're storing about 9 trillion of those photos in the cloud at the moment. And while we send about 300 billion physical letters every year, we send about 300 billion emails every single day. So in essence, most organizations that I'm dealing with are overwhelmed by the data. 90% of data is not used 3 months after it is stored. Only about 5% of data is actively managed, has a governance policy. So basically 95% of data is not governed. We essentially store it in, we call them data centers, but we should really call them data dumps. And the implications of that are that a typical data center can drink about 1 million liters of water a day. And one of those millions of servers that are in these data centers can cause between 1 and 2 tons of CO2 to manufacture. And the devices that we use are 15 billion smartphones that we've made since 2007. Each one of those creates 60 kg of CO2 to manufacture. A laptop creates 300 kg of CO2 to manufacture. So a lot of the long-term implications are in e-waste. We are now creating over 50 million tons of e-waste a year. In 15 years, we'll be creating 100 million tons. We'd be able to build a Great Wall of China with 50 million tons of e-waste. Most of that e-waste is not properly recycled. In fact, most of it is sent from rich countries to poor countries, where it is poisoning millions of women and children as they try and disassemble and try and get some sort of value out of it. So there's a big hidden impact of digital in the actual devices that are absolutely exploding and have short 2 to 3 year life cycles. So there's a lot of challenges with this explosion of data. Wonderful, the 5%. We've got 5% wonderful data, and we've got 95% waste, and we do not manage that waste.
And you just asked the question, because I was going to come to that. So how do you sustain digitalization at this scale?
Well, we clean up the waste. I mean, instead of this culture of let's create and collect every single piece of data imaginable, and we'll be able to do something interesting with it later, we need to improve human skills. I've been involved in this industry for over 25 years, and there's less information architecture skills today in most organizations than there were 20 years ago. We need to improve human skills of organization. We need to say what to keep, what to delete. Most people just keep everything to today because they think there's no cost to it because of, cheap storage. So cheap storage and cheap processing has created a culture of waste. And we need to move back from that culture, not losing all the tremendous value that can be achieved through data, and really get rid of the waste often at source, decide what we're going to keep, decide what we're going to archive. We need much better governance strategies. 95% of data is not governed.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. We will come back to you during our chat here today. I now want to bring in Ms. Xiaofei Yao. Your company, Rogrand, offers a pharmaceutical online trading platform as well as a smart cleaning mobile service. Therefore, it is dealing with sensitive information in a strictly regulated environment. How much of a challenge has it been to grow in such a regulated environment, in particular during these COVID times?
Thank you, Peter. It's my great pleasure to participate in this panel again, especially during this tough period. Some of you may know, Shanghai has been locked down for a few weeks, and the situation in Beijing is getting tighter and tighter. So we have been in this COVID-19 times for 2 years. A lot of things have changed and seem to become a new normal. For example, on our platform, the regulated drugs listed are no longer free to trade. We need to strictly define the classification according to the COVID-19 related regulations. Any individual purchases the code and fever-related medicine needs to be registered with their detailed information and all the data linked to the official regulatory department. And as you may know, November last year, the Personal Information Protection Law was introduced in China. This has a significant impact on the internet-based business, such like us, especially in health sector. We all have to reassess the process and the data security according to the new law. And some of our business plans, such as cooperation with the insurance company to launch new insurance products based on some patient data, have been postponed. In order to cope with these challenges and develop sustainable solutions, we have to build a new team to work with the top privacy-preserving computing technology team to develop a data engine. So in this area, I believe this new technology will have a significant role in the future and will be largely applied. And there will be a huge demand in the talents in this field. There are the real solutions we have put in place.
I keep forgetting my microphone. And what would you like governments to do just to enable more companies to enter and grow in the digital economy in which you are working right now?
Well, I think my wish could be, which I also mentioned in a number of occasions. I think in the digital world today, a lot of policy setting probably should be more regulated or set up by the industry and also by the use of the data. I think especially this perspective is particularly important for health industry.
Michelle, thank you very much. I want to bring in the UNCTAD Secretary General now. I mean, one of your roles is to, foster consensus between member states with regard to data governance. How can this role be realized in practice, Ms. Greenspan?
Well, I think, Peter, we first have to convince the member states that this is something that we have to do together. Yes. But the most important part of it, apart from convincing member states, is to convince them that it's not only them that have to make the rules, that we need to bring the other stakeholders. Yes, We need to bring the academia, we need to bring the civil society, we need to bring the minds, the science that is behind this to help us find the right solutions in the right regulations. We have heard very clearly this wonderful discussion that the panel has held, that the problem is not to regulate, but to regulate well. You know, to have the wrong regulation with can be a disaster too. Yes. So I think that is really the main point here. I believe we can help in doing this from UNCTAD, not only because we have this digital mandate, yes, with respect to digitalization and development, but also because we have the Science and Technology Commission of the UN. Yes. So if we bring these two things together, maybe we can be, you know, proactive in trying to generate a space like the space we have here today. Yes, to bring all these elements together. So I hope we can count with all of the panelists that we have been hearing today and the rest of the organizations. So we can create a space for dialogue before we create a space for negotiations. Yes, we need to create the right framework and atmosphere to really bring the, you know, the collective will that we need for this issue. That is, I think, a defining issue of our time. And let me just say one more thing, Peter, here, that is very important not to think about the regulation from a technical point of view. Yes, we are looking at this from a development point of view. Let's not lose, yeah, the sight on the development aspect, because more inequalities and you know, widening inequalities cannot be the way to go forward.
Well, one country that has been able to harness its all its efforts in this digital growth, of course, is China, which has come up in leaps and bounds over the past 20 years and has used it to effectively develop the country. I just want to come to you, Ms. Xiao. Are there any lessons that other developing countries can learn from China and put to their own benefits?
You're still muted. You're still muted, Jofe. There we go.
Yeah, I've said on a number of occasions, in terms of digital economy, there should be a different classification of developed and developing countries. And China, of course, has been on the top part of this list. I think this benefits from the great internet infrastructure and a huge internet population in China. So according to latest report, the online population in China has exceeded 1 billion, which is greater than the whole population in Europe. And this is the fact. And secondly, the digital economy has been developed so fast in China in the last 20 years, which has also been the best time for the capital markets. So, you know, it takes some time for users to accept new online experience and build the trust. Therefore, the fundraising is essential for the new start internet companies. So adequate funding and active capital markets is the precondition to escalate the internet-based business model. And apart from this, I think a great number and continuous talents in this field are vitally important as well. Nevertheless, people are the largest and the most important assets for the internet-based company. Moreover, back to 10 or 15 years ago, I think a relaxed and encouraging policy environment has also promoted these innovations and built new business models. However, we need to watch out the data abuse and the monopoly, which we are currently regulating very tightly in China now. And on top of this, and also, you know, address a balance between digital economy and the traditional economy needs to be planned at a macroeconomic level to make sure it's the sustainability. I think these are what can be shared for other countries.
Michelle, thank you very much. I want to look to the future now. And Ms. Abu Zaid, you heard that piece of advice there. People are the biggest asset for an economy. Africa, a continent of about 1.2, 1.3 billion people. What will it take to ensure that countries trailing behind in this digital economy are able to catch up, especially on the African continent?
Thank you, Peter. I mean, there are two things. First, there is what's happening around the world and what's happening in Africa. Remember that the developing countries are not necessarily at par when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to discussions, of this nature, due to lack of capacity and also the dominance of certain companies, maybe of the digital value chain. So there is need also for more presence in number of developing countries, and here I also advocate for African countries, but also in capacity, meaning we need to strengthen the capacity of our African countries and awareness of our political leaders of the importance of such discussions and of such negotiations, and to make sure that we are present enough in way to make the discussion and the decisions equitable. I mean, when it comes to the global arena or the global forum. Sorry. But when it comes to specifically what would it take, or how do we see the future going? I mean, despite all the difficulties, Africa is still progressing in many ways at a faster speed. So recent trends show steady expansion of Africa's digital economy and uptake of digital transactions in various sectors, whether it's the markets, financial technology services, mobile internet subscriptions, and other things. And we also recognize there's a lot of road to cover in digital development. The growth being recorded in the region is quite promising. So our efforts at the African Union are to accompany the African countries in this digital transformation journey in line with best practices across the world. So one of them, I did mention that our digital transformation strategy, which was adopted 3 years ago, the African Union Interoperability Framework for Digital ID, which was also approved earlier this year. I did mention the policy, the data policy framework, and then there is the ongoing implementation of many other initiatives at the level of the country, region, or the continent. Now, governing how cross-border data should flow is a critical piece of public policy and is important for Africa's growth. We therefore advocate to get African countries prioritizing data governance that is geared towards supporting digital economy growth and removing this discomfort and barriers surrounding cross countries data transfers, and to promote trust and confidence in the digital ecosystems, and to guarantee fair and open access, control and use of this valuable resource. We continue to do it ourselves, but also to promote the investments in digital infrastructure to stimulate economic activity, link producers to markets, increase inter-African trade, accelerate growth, and also the public-private partnerships to implement many of these activities. We also work a lot with our partners towards these ends, and one important part in that regard is definitely UNCTAD. I mean, in this and so many other aspects when it comes to development in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abu Zaid. Mr. Surf, we just heard that, you know, the African Union is very interested in in providing internet access to as many Africans as possible. I mean, you could say that in today's world, access to the internet is a human right. What does your most optimistic scenario look like for the internet to be a force for inclusive development? And what would be your most pessimistic one?
Oh my. Okay. Well, let me start with the positive one then. If we get it right, if we can resolve a lot of these policy issues, if we can solve some of the problems of digital divide, making things affordable and reliable, making them sustainable, then we will see an acceleration of scientific work and results and understanding of the world around us. We'll see technology continuing to evolve at a rapid pace. We'll see a growing dependence on global e-commerce and its facilitation by having this online system in place. We will have the ability to literally work from anywhere for some jobs, not all of them, but many of them can be done remotely, as we have learned during the pandemic. And for those people, the possibility of living in one part of the world and working in another effectively is quite feasible. I think we might also anticipate a more coordinated response to global warming, because the presence of the internet and its collaborative capacity will allow us to take more coordinated action to deal with that problem. I think we may also anticipate, in the good scenario, increased resilience of the internet infrastructure. We're seeing, for example, the low Earth orbiting satellite efforts to give increased access to the internet. At some point, it may be impossible to avoid access to the internet, thanks to things like the Starlink and other similar LEO services. And if you've been following the telegeography maps, you'll see an increasing investment in subsea cables. It's astonishing. I never would have imagined seeing so many islands in the Pacific and in the Atlantic being interconnected by undersea cable, in addition to the Earth orbiting satellite option. And finally, I think that if we are lucky, if the UN and other similarly minded organizations succeed in achieving accountability and agency for the users of the internet and for the providers of its service, then we can anticipate what I hope is a very good and a very productive future. Now, you asked me about the other side of that coin. And so the pessimistic surf says, well, political and technical fragmentation may well be in our future if we don't find a way to work together. We may find that malware is rampant, that ransomware and denial of service attacks keep occurring. We may find people rejecting the internet because they think it's too risky to use. And they choose not to be online at all, and they lose whatever the benefits there might be. And we find that harmful behaviors are unmitigated. That would be the most pessimistic outcome. I hope very much that conferences like this one will teach us that there is a way forward which is closer to the positive side than the negative one. But as I say before, we are going to have to figure out how to solve a lot of these problems in a collaborative and a cooperative way, because the provision of agency and accountability will only work if we're prepared to cooperate across borders in order to provide all of the benefits and defend ourselves from potential harmful behaviors. I'm on the optimistic side of all this, but I'm well aware that it's not, as they say in basketball, a slam dunk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Surf. Thank you indeed. Mr. McGovern, you've warned us about the environmental pitfalls of this rapid move towards digitalized societies across the world. Can you just tell us in just a few minutes, what is needed to make sure we avoid the least favorable scenarios?
I think we can design most systems with 90% less data and 90% less energy. And, you know, that will have a tremendously positive impact. Increasingly, data is a tax on poorer people. For poorer people, data is much more expensive and their phones and devices are much older. So if the will is there, we can design environments that achieve the same objectives, but are much lighter. So I think if we really manage the 95% rather than just the 5%, we can create environments that create much less CO2 and are much more democratic, because as a rule, get the waste out of the data and you have a better environment for people and you have a better world for the climate as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. Let me just turn to Andy. I mean, you know, in comparison to a lot of other companies in this particular space, Proton Mail is still a relatively small company. You were telling me about 50 million users so far. For me, that's huge, but I guess for you guys, that's still a relatively small company. Now, what kind of balance would you like, you know, governments across the world to strike when they're formulating policies to strike in order to favor not only the big companies, but up and coming ones like yours? I'd rather use up and coming than use small for yours.
I think that's a good question. If you look out today, you know, across the world, we live in an internet where essentially, you know, the entire internet is dominated by a small number of companies concentrated predominantly in the US and in China. And I don't think, you know, when we think about the benefit of the world overall, when we think about, you know, sustainable development for, you know, all countries, that is the future that we want. So if we want to move off of that path, the question becomes, what is it that, you know, we can do to change that? And how do we get, you know, all countries to agree on that? So maybe we can start first with the piece of, you know, what do we have to do, right? And this is an area that I'm happy to say there has been significant progress in just the past year or two. You know, we see this actually starting from the European Union, which is adopting the Digital Markets Act. We see this also in the US, where there's actually also competition legislation that is moving through both houses of Congress. But what is, I think, also very encouraging is it's not just the EU and the US, right? There's actually a dozen other countries around the world, including Brazil, South Korea, Japan, you know, in fact, a very diverse group of countries that is now taking action on competition. And if we look at the things that are included in the DMA or the proposed US legislation, there's a lot of things that are common sense, right? You know, today, between Google and Apple, they dominate over 90% of the mobile market. It's either Android or iOS. And we know that one of the things that Google and Apple has done is enforce that if you want to be on their marketplace, on their platform, so essentially on mobile at all, you need to pay a 30% fee, right, to them. And I can't think of any market in the world where you can have true competition if you're forced to pay 30% of your revenue towards your competitor. This simply doesn't work. There's also something that, you know, if we look at the DMA, what is tackling is the concept of self-preferencing, right? Today, if you purchase a phone, it is almost 100% going to be either an iOS device or an Android device. And if you buy that device, there will be defaults set on that device, which today steer you towards the services that are being offered by either Google or Apple. And we know from data and experiments that 95% of people don't change the defaults. So if we don't tackle self-preferencing of defaults on mobile devices in a mobile-first world, the pie that is available to the other companies in the world is just 5%. So these are two common sense things that, you know, we can do. Now, the second part is, how do we get consensus to solve this problem, right? Because if you're a US or maybe a Chinese policymaker, you might look at this and say, well, actually the status quo suits us, right? The biggest companies in the world are in the US. Why would we ever want to tackle that? And On this, I would say it's not a zero-sum game, right? Just because you regulate big companies doesn't mean that you will destroy your economy. That's just a fallacy. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. If we look at history, right? In the 80s, the US took very strong antitrust action against Bell. In the 90s, both in US and EU, there was antitrust action against Microsoft. And arguably, it was that action that allowed Apple, Google, and Facebook to really grow and achieve dominance in the past in the next 10, 20 years after that. So in fact, if we look about antitrust, what antitrust actually means is competition, right? It's competition law. And competition is the basic requirement that you need for innovation. And innovation is what drives economic growth. So it doesn't matter whether you're a big country or a small country, a developing or developed economy, competition laws, if applied in a correct way, can actually drive economic growth for everybody. So it's not zero sum. It's not, you either cater to big companies or small companies. There is a way here to get a global consensus, I believe. And I think, the platform like e-commerce week is one way in which we can begin to come together and make this idea, not just a US or European idea, but something that works globally.
Thank you very much, Andy. Ms. Yao, the pharmaceutical and health sector will be increasingly driven by data. What do you think are going to be the main risks associated with this?
Yeah, data has been the factor of production. I think it goes without saying its importance, especially in the health sector. However, data sharing and flowing has been extremely difficult given the challenges such as data ownership, data security, and privacy protection. These challenges has been around for many years and have been discussed all the time. So in China, according to official report, 70% of the hospitals have the information system implemented, but only 3% of the hospitals have some degree of system integration and the data sharing. So the situation varies among different regions. It largely depends on the local health authorities and the completion of the information system infrastructure in the region. Some trends we can see in the recent years and also associated with some risks. First of all, policies promoting data sharing have been introduced, especially from the social insurance settlement point of view. It allows the payment automation and fraud prevention. Also in China now, the tiered diagnosis and treatment model is being rolled out in many parts of China at a regional level. It requires the sharing of patient medical history and records. However, we can also see some challenges in real life circumstances. For example, medical examination fees such as CT scan and MR contributes a significant part of the hospital revenue, so that some hospitals do not accept the previous examination result and require patients to redo the checkups at their own facilities. So a lot of in real life circumstance, it's not just the policy setting, it's the real business, it's the real benefits and profits. Secondly, we can see some new business model, especially internet-based company that help bridging pharmaceutical companies with doctors and patients to obtain their medication feedbacks in order to evaluate the drug efficacy. This data has been gathered through following up to the individual patient on their internet platform. It improves precision medication and in turn, the data feedbacks to the pharmaceutical companies to help medical research. So companies with such data collection capability are highly valued by the capital markets. However, as I mentioned, these companies are now facing huge risks given the personal information protection law newly introduced at the end of last year in China. So last but not least, at a patient level, in many cities in China, patients can make a hospital appointment through the mobile apps and manage their social insurance account online. While in the current COVID-19 environment, this information flows also allow the government to trace the potential cases and manage the risks in a timely manner. this application of data flows I've mentioned earlier has brought great value to the society. However, data security is still the main risk, and the data ownership is still the barrier to greater use of this data. These are global challenges, not only in China, but I believe, as I talked earlier, the privacy preserving computing technology, blockchain, and the policy settings will help solving these challenges. But eventually, I think the collaboration for the purpose of building a community of a shared future is the key to resolve the toughest problem, especially when it's come to cross-border data sharing. In health sector, it's vitally important. And as Wheaton said earlier, what I remember is protection does not mean isolation. So I think it's not a technical issue, nor a legal issue, but maybe it's an opportunity for human reunion. This is my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zhao. I want to throw this, probably a last comment today to Mr. McGovern. When you hear about this rate at which the digitalization of the society is going, does it make you groan with frustration when you consider the society? Or as Mr. Cerf told us earlier, do you see advantages in the sense that it could help us fight climate change?
Well, it's a positive and a negative. Of course, data can help us map the climate, but data centers in Ireland at the moment are consuming 10% of our electricity. And there's talk about moratoriums on future data centers. So we've this explosion of data is increasing at a pace that is absolutely extraordinary. It's exponential growth. So if we can, figure out the really important data and not produce the less important data, we can have benefits for everybody. Internet of Things is going to explode it onto another exponential level. So I think it requires management. And I think it also requires us, to become more mature in how we look at technology. Technology is treated like a god in so many areas and in governments, etc., as if, AI is going to solve this and the next technology will solve all our problems. We still need human skills. We need governance skills. We need information architecture skills. We need to be able to get control of our data rather than hoping that technology will solve all those problems. And there's a lot of great jobs in information architecture and information management design if we focus on that area, but we're not focusing on that area right now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jerry McGovern. A lot there to take in, and I'm sure all of us go away, a bit more enlightened about the growth of the digital sector, but also with some of the worries that have been highlighted to us during this session. I'm afraid we have run out of time, so we can't take any of your questions. I am aware that some questions have come in, but a lot of them are directed towards UNCTAD, and I'm sure UNCTAD will be responding to the ones that they can do. Just before we go, I just want to say a very, very big thank you to Ms. Xiaofei Zhuang, Mr. Jerry McGovern, Andy Yen here, founder and Chief Executive Officer of Proton Mail, Mr. Vint Cerf, Her Excellency Ms. Amani Abu Zaid, Mr. Johnny Plate, and Her Excellency Rebecca Greenspan, and all of you who have joined us both in person and online today for this session towards digital and data governance for all. Thank you very much, and have a safe trip wherever you're going to from here. Thank you.